When we talk about the Kennedys, the names most often spoken are JFK, Bobby, and Ted. But in a new book, it's Eunice who takes center stage with a rare look at how she became a political force in her own right, creating a movement for children and adults with intellectual disabilities, and ultimately founding the Special Olympics. And that's just part of her story. The book's called Eunice, the Kennedy Who Changed the World. I'm joined by the author, Eileen McNamara, Pulitzer Prize-winning former columnist at The Globe, who now heads the journalism department at Brandeis University. Eileen, it's great to see you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Why her? What attracted you?
Why her? Because it's too easy to write women out of history.
But did you know, I mean, I worry that, I hope I'm just ill-informed as opposed to gender bias like her father. But I didn't know I knew Special Olympics, which is huge, but that was it. Did you know more when you started?
No, I knew some of it. I knew a little bit. But I didn't know the extent of it. But I think the disparity in the way she died 2 weeks before Senator Ted Kennedy did, and the disparity in their obituaries struck me. One of the things that struck me the most was the photo array in the New York Times obit for Senator Kennedy misidentified all the women. So it was as if they were interchangeable or invisible.
So I know you're tired of this, but the line that's probably most repeated from your book is the line from her father about the potential of his daughter. What was his line, Joe Sr.?
If that girl had been born with balls, she would have been a great politician.
And she was a great politician.
That's right.
Even though she was never elected. Was all this a product of Rosemary, her sister, about whom we knew a little but not much? Where did this all grow from?
No, I mean, some of it was. Clearly, her sister Rosemary, her older sister, was lobotomized when she was 23 years old. She was born with mild intellectual disabilities, compounded by some mental illness. It's pretty clear. That was part of it. I think she had a lot of rage about the way that Rosemary was treated. But she was
by her family or the world?
By both. But she was an ambitious woman at a time when it was difficult to be an ambitious woman in any family. But to be an ambitious woman in that family, where you're invisible, was really hard. When
Rosemary was lobotomized, was it 10 years that she was gone, out of sight but not out of mind?
Well, she was really gone for 20. She was gone for 20 years.
Did people know, how many years was it that Eunice didn't see her sister?
At least 10. We know at least 10. The documents that I could find indicate to me that she probably knew in 1949.
And did she know where she was during this period of time?
Yes, she did. Whether the rest of them did. Ted Kennedy said he never knew where she was.
So the goal was to sort of whitewash her out of family history for reasons of embarrassment? Or
for reasons of political ambition for his sons, I think, primarily. In the same way, Eunice wanted to be a nun. And he thwarted that ambition, too, because it didn't comport with what he wanted for Jack.
So in terms of the relationship father to daughter, one of the things I never get is it appears that this young woman, Eunice, revered her father.
Absolutely did.
Who denied her, or attempted to deny her opportunity. How did those things fit into each other?
You're in a family,
yeah,
right?
No,
so family dynamics are complicated. You can love your father and be infuriated by the fact that he's so dismissive of you. She longed for his approval. She lived for his approval.
Did you know? I assume you knew Ted Kennedy.
Yes. I covered him on the Hill.
Oh, of course. Did you know Eunice?
I met her, covered her at press conferences. I did not know her.
You know, I always wonder when I speak to somebody like you who digs so deeply into the life of somebody they didn't know well. When you finish this, do you feel like you know her? I don't mean know about her.
Yeah.
Do you feel in some visceral way like I know this woman and I could have been sitting next to her having a, you know what I mean? I mean that real kind of relationship thing?
I do. I think there's something incredibly arrogant about what you do as a biographer because you were trying to get to that stage with her. I know her well enough to know that she wouldn't want to hang out with me. I don't play tennis. I don't know how to sail. I don't have a quarter of her energy. So I wouldn't be on her party list.
You know, one of the things, I'm spending a lot of time these days, I think like a lot of American, ruining the days, you know, going back to the days when people of different political persuasions actually talked to each other, socialized with each other.
Right.
tell briefly about this little house that the first-term Congressman, Jack Kennedy, and his sister shared in Georgetown, about how some of the unlikely visitors were to this house, who they were, and that sort of thing.
So when Jack went to Congress in 1947, Eunice went too. They both moved to Washington. She had a job with the Justice Department, working on a task force on juvenile delinquency. So she and Jack were roommates. And they had dinner parties all the time. And one of their frequent dinner guests was Richard M. Nixon.
Who was elected the same
as
to Congress, the same deal as...
Yep, they were both freshmen.
And what was that like?
They played charades, and they talked politics, and it was sort of a chaotic household. It was sort of part frat house, part Hollywood celebrity salon, and part political salon.
Is Nixon the one who tells the story that you recount in your book about when the guys went out back to smoke a cigar?
Nixon was a frequent dinner guest, and as was often the habit in those days, when the dinner broke up, the women went into the parlor to gossip or chit-chat, and the men repaired to the den to smoke cigars and drink whiskey. Eunice went with them and smoked her own cigar.
You know, I don't know if this is mentioned in your book because I haven't finished it yet. One of the other interesting visitors was Joe McCarthy, who I think was elected to the Senate in the
He was in the Senate.
Same year. Your former colleague, Larry Ty, wrote, as you know, a fabulous book about RFK, and he talks about this odd depth of feeling that Bobby Kennedy had for Joe McCarthy, trying to sneak into his funeral, that sort of thing. Do you know if this is where they made their first connection?
Well, that's one of the places. No, well, Joe McCarthy, in 47, no, because Bobby was much younger, so they wouldn't have met there. But Eunice was squired around Washington by Joe McCarthy quite a bit. He was a huge hit with the whole Kennedy family. Despite the fact that he was a Republican, Joe Kennedy contributed to all his campaigns.
And the Special Olympics, we just have a minute left, her whole commitment to people with intellectual disabilities or with mental retardation, as it was called in those days, started with something. Was it as simple as the camp they had?
It wasn't as simple as that. That's the street story about the sweet lady. The real story is she hijacked the Kennedy Foundation, and she turned that charitable foundation into an engine of social change. They funded research that had never been done before. When Jack got elected, she put this on his agenda. And
that's what came across them. You know, even if the father didn't respect the potential of this incredibly powerful woman, the brothers seemed to. Because one of the things you mentioned is, didn't Jack say to his staff, whatever she wants,
give it to her.
Do for Eunice Kennedy?
And every other biographer writes about that as if she's just a pain in the ass. She was a pain in the ass, but she also knew what she was doing.
You know, I'm assuming that the takeaway from this book is not simply that Eunice Kennedy, about whom you knew not very much, left this legacy that is colossal. You argue maybe even the greatest of the Kennedys. Is there something bigger that we should be taking away from this thing?
Yeah, stop overlooking women.
I had a feeling that was in there. It's a great book, Eileen. It's a pleasure to see you. Thanks so much. It's called Eunice, the Kennedy Who Changed the World, and She Did.